after the networks did their fact checking, came the fact check to end all fact checks from the Harris-Walz campaign. A thorough, itemized, pithy takedown, not just with the facts, but with the evidence and the receipts, and a bit of cleverness and humor, an epic and important trolling of the ex-president that we can only assume made his blood boil. The list the Harris-Walz campaign provided, we read most of it on the air, was 31 fact checks. It was important for a lot of reasons, not just because it got the truth out immediately, but it's a really important and healthy display of this campaign's competence and strategy for the next 88 days. Be quick, be straightforward, be accurate, mix in a little bit of humor, and wouldn't hurt to be a little sharp-edged while you do it. They called it, quote, Donald Trump's very good, very normal press conference, and proceeded to say things like this, quote, we work to pin down reality so Donald Trump, bless his heart, doesn't have to. Here are a few of their fact checks again. People have spoken to bigger crowds than Donald Trump, Obama, Clinton, literally anyone at Lollapalooza, Coachella, or the World Cup. Trump said they have commercials at a level no one else does. He's being drastically outspent on the airways. Governor Josh Shapiro is actually a great guy. Trump said he was not complaining. He, in fact, very much was. Trump does not know the difference between asylum seekers and an insane asylum. After-birth abortion does not exist. Minnesota and Virginia are not the same. There are no polls that say Donald Trump is going to win in a landslide. This afternoon, the campaign pushed their fact-checking endeavors even further, putting out a second press release on what they called Trump's temper tantrum, this time with many visuals and many quotes from publications, further correcting and pushing back against his copious lies. As we take stock of that powerful display by the Harris-Walz campaign, begs the question, has Trump finally met his match as a liar? Questions where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Staff writer for The Atlantic, author of the book Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World, Ann Applebaum is here. Plus, president of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carasone is back. And former RNC spokesman, host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller's here. Ann, I want you just to help us understand why the truth is such a lethal threat to a wannabe autocrat.
So what autocrats do is they seek to shape reality in a way that suits them. And this has a couple of purposes. You know, sometimes the person lying does so not in order to convince people, but just to show how powerful he is. He's so powerful, he's so important that he can lie. He can shape reality. Nobody can stop him. Nobody can prevent him. And that's something you see in dictatorships all over the world. Another purpose sometimes is to create this sense of uncertainty and unclarity that makes people feel they don't really know what's true and what's not. You know, if you keep lying, repeatedly over and over again, contradicting yourself, saying first one thing, then another, eventually you give people the feeling that they'll never know what's true. And why should they participate in political life if it's just full of lies and crazy stuff that they can't understand? It's a way of making people feel apathetic and making them feel like they don't want to be part of politics. And, these are tactics used in Russia. They're used by dictatorships all over the world, and they are also used by Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, I think, first displayed his commitment to the first thing you're explaining to us, this alternate reality, when he went to the CIA, of all places, like an institution rooted in truths that protect the lives, not just of Americans, but of our allies around the world, and stood in front of the wall that honors those who have lost their lives anonymously serving the CIA, and talked about his crowd size. And I remember watching it. I think I was on the air live, and I remember watching it with my jaw on the floor. But it gets at the second thing you're describing. The lies are so audacious and about things so previously sacred that they're disorienting. Talk about that as a tactic.
It's a tactic used to, as I said, to make people feel like there's no point in participating. It also makes people who are part of government institutions unsure of what their jobs were going to be. I mean, the lie that I remember really well at the beginning of the Trump administration was when he claimed that his crowd size on the mall during the inauguration was the biggest ever, and he tried to get the National Park Service to lie about it. And that's one further step. That's getting people whose job it is to monitor crowds and to take care of, keep the grass clean, and people who are dedicated to protecting our national parks and who have environmental training. That's trying to get them to participate in his fantasy. And that is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do. I mean, it was a little thing, it was stupid and people laughed at it, but it was an attempt to bend reality so that he would both frighten people and scare people away from politics.
Angelo, my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell did so. Let me just show you what he did. Did something rather extraordinary on his broadcast last night. Let me play a little bit of it.
It was 2016 all over again today. Donald Trump spoke at his home in Florida for over an hour, and all of the cable news networks, including this one, carried it live, just like they all did repeatedly in 2016. It would be hard to find a sentence in what Donald Trump said today that did not include at least one lie. We went back 9 years in the press coverage of the campaign, the media coverage. Donald Trump gets credit from the people he lied to today for lying to them. They appreciate it. Reporters understandably and incorrectly believe that the most important thing a candidate can do is answer their questions. But they don't know what an answer actually is. Words spoken after their question marks are not necessarily answers and are never answers when they come from Donald Trump.
I played that because Harris actually did answer questions yesterday. She walked to the press before she got on the plane. She answered all of their questions. I don't think they were shouting at her when she walked away. And I don't know that everyone was even sitting in her live events. We were, because we heard they were happening when we were on the air. But just explain to me, in any way you want to, anecdotal, systemic, why the press is still struggling with how to cover Donald Trump.
I mean, in part, I think a few reasons. One, I think in part it ties in with what Anna was talking about before, that this is what happens when you're confronted with this avalanche of lies. You flood the zone and then they drown. They haven't adapted. And that in some ways is a failure of the industry to sort of figure out a new approach that is professional, but is also responsive to that moment. There's also another part that's just basic muscle memory, which is that I think it's worth keeping in mind that this is the first election in 30 years. First election in 30 years where Rush Limbaugh is not the single largest get out the vote operation. And by that, I'm using that as an illustration to point out the fact that we've been dealing with for decades a massive right-wing media echo chamber that has not just been an amplifier of lies and false narratives and misinformation, but has also repeatedly beaten up the press such that they, in an attempt to inoculate themselves from cries of bias, have actually started to privilege all kinds of misinformation, false narratives, and worse, have sort of adopted a double standard as a matter of course. And there's all kinds of examples of that. I mean, in the weeks after Donald Trump became the presumptive nominee, he didn't do any sit-down interviews except for one with Fox. He sat with Fox. But he didn't do a real interview with a reporter. There wasn't any clamoring in the press asking why he wasn't doing interviews. Yet there have been clamorings this week and attacks and criticisms of Harris that somehow she's not doing something from major publications by not sitting down for an interview. That's a double standard. Or how about back in May when Donald Trump reportedly made an offer to oil executives to spend $1 billion on ads. In exchange, he would roll back a whole bunch of environmental policies. The only national network that covered that was MSNBC. And then if you look on social media, every single major news channel and news operation that week on their social media channels covered the fact that Vice President Harris said the F word, but not a single one of them talked about that deal and that report about Donald Trump. So I think that's really what's going on here. It's the confused and disoriented, and there's also some muscle memory here that has been built up over decades.
The asymmetry, Angelo, has been, I think, the biggest dynamic that has aided Donald Trump. And I remember talking about it on the Today Show in the 2015 Republican primary. The asymmetry, and I think it was Mitt Romney who wrote an op-ed and called on Trump to release his taxes. Maybe that was in the beginning of 2016. But the double standard that the press either accept it or didn't know how to sort of find the strength to push back and require the same standard for Trump as everybody else. Do you see any signs? I see signs in this fact check that happened yesterday that the Harris campaign, it may be the first institution to try to push back against that asymmetry. Do you see any signs that make you think maybe this gig is up for Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think, usually when we talk, it's always about something sort of a little bit depressing and unsettling, but this is a green shoot.
Totally.
This is this is a positive thing, and it's real. I mean, this is a real positive thing, because one of the things that the right wing has is that their audience has baked in this amplification imperative. So not only do their people lie, but then they reflexively they'll go ahead and repeat that. They amplify it, they saturate it. And then you have the media that's not playing this referee. What the Harris campaign has done really effectively so far is they understand that these packages are not only for news outlets, they're also for their audience, their people, who then go and can take that content and amplify it. They want to amplify it. It's designed in a way to actually empower individuals to share it to others. It's fun to share, not just to stick it to them because it's actually truth. And this is, there's that famous saying about how, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can even get its boots on. And the only way to sort of counteract that asymmetry is that because lying is a cheat code, it is an advantage, is to actually do this, not only because it allows for people to spread it, but it actually then generates a backward effect on actual traditional news outlets. If they have not adapted yet to sort of be the vanguard, they can at least be the laggard by covering the effective work that the campaign is doing, and because they can't ignore it because their people are helping saturate it. So I think it's a really positive thing.
Tim, it is all of our job, right, to defend and protect the truth. I mean, my colleague Rachel Maddow led her show with a really powerful monologue about how the rule of law needs to be defended and about how it is mortal. I mean, I think you could extend that to the truth. The truth needs to be defended. It is all of our job. But for reasons that Ann has articulated, here in year 9, people are sort of a combination of numb and disoriented in some ways by Trump's lies. I want you to build on what Angela is saying about these real signs of life in the Harris-Walz campaigns. It looks like something very different. And I know you were on one of those Republican primary campaigns that ran against Trump in 2015, which was sort of the first patient zero in terms of dealing with his lies that weren't checked by the press and weren't really held. He wasn't held to account by the voters ever. But I wonder what you see when you look at this Harris-Walz campaign.
Yeah, I agree with Angela. Look, we made a bunch of mistakes in counteracting Trump in 2015. I feel like we deserve some grace because it was a pro-do effort in dealing with this monster. It's been frustrating to see subsequent campaigns make the same mistakes. It's something that we've talked about a lot on here and in commentary, and like how to combat this. Because it's important to fact check. Like, that's true. The truth is important, but it's also important to mock. And mocking him and belittling him in a lot of ways is more powerful than fact checking, in part because of what Angela says. It's more fun for people to amplify and share that are on her team, but also because it takes away his power. In a certain way, right? And just for a hypothetical example, if yesterday during the press conference, he's out there saying, well, the economy's terrible. Like, okay, well, one way to fact check that would be to say something like, people's take-home pay has increased slightly more than inflation has. So it's not terrible. It's actually doing pretty good. That's true. That's a true fact check. But is that compelling? That kind of plays into his hands in a lot of ways. You're now talking about inflation. Now think about a different one where he lies about how his crowds were apparently